Now, a report on what some combat veterans are telling Congress they saw in Iraq. Congressional correspondent Kwame Holman has the story.
As the House debate continued last week over funding the Iraq War, leading anti-war Democrats convened nearby to hear from a group of veterans who say they witnessed and participated in widespread misconduct during their time in Iraq. The stories came from a dozen or so former Marines and soldiers who left Iraq at least 2 years ago.
My testimony is in the form of a letter.
They include accounts of unwarranted killings of Iraqi civilians and mistreatment of detainees that were met with indifference or encouragement by commanding officers. Two of the men said the weight of such experiences led them to suicide attempts. They have dubbed themselves Winter Soldiers, the same name used by Vietnam veterans who reported similar alleged abuses during that war.
This morning,
they were welcomed by California's Lynn Woolsey.
We now have an opportunity to hear from not the military's top brass, but directly from you.
Jason Lemieux was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps 2 years ago, following 3 combat tours in Iraq.
Please understand that what you hear from me is the tip of the iceberg.
Lemieux described an incident near Ramadi early in 2006. A Marine platoon had received intermittent gunfire, 4 shots in all. In preparing a report on the incident, he said the unit responded with excessive force, firing thousands of rifle and machine gun rounds, anti-tank weapons, and other heavy weaponry in the general direction of the incoming shots. Lemieux said when he tried to enter those facts in a report, a superior officer stopped him and then changed the report.
And he said, "You said here that the platoon only took 4 rounds of enemy fire. There's no way they expended all that ammo, and they only took 4 rounds." He then proceeded to sit down at my intelligence computer and falsify the very same report that he had just accused me of falsifying.
Also constantly changing, Lemieux and other veterans said, were the rules of engagement, when and how to use force.
I was involved in firefights during which the rules of engagement were lifted by the chain of command or were simply ignored, resulting in needless and strategically counterproductive civilian deaths. I was ordered multiple times by commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers to shoot unarmed civilians if their presence made me feel uncomfortable. These orders were given with the understanding that my immediate chain of command would protect their subordinates from legal repercussions.
In one battle in 2004, Lemieux said the rules changed during the fighting.
The word came down the chain that all personnel, anyone not wearing a U.S. military uniform on the streets, is considered an enemy combatant and is to be shot on sight.
You mean anyone?
Correct.
Anytime you give high-powered weapons to 18 and 19-year-olds, bad things are going to happen.
Retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Gary Solis is an attorney and expert on the law of armed conflict. He teaches at West Point. Before watching the televised Winter Soldier meeting at our request, he was skeptical about their claims. Afterward, he changed his mind.
I was immediately impressed with the sincerity, the depth of feeling, the sense of wanting to right wrong. What they had to say jives with reports I've received from lieutenants who returned to West Point where I taught. My former students come back and tell me the same thing.
Jason Lemieux said he was trying to write up a report that indicated fire was returned after 4 rounds were fired on the U.S. position, and someone stepped in, an officer, I guess, and said, no, a major, and said, you cannot.
We can't send this up with 4 rounds saying we expended this kind of fire to return 4 rounds. Another very disappointing recitation in that it describes an officer participating in falsifying a report.
I didn't ask Jason to identify the major. I don't know that he did in his testimony. Will the Pentagon be interested in knowing who that major was?
I have my doubts. I have my doubts if the Pentagon is going to want to pay too much attention to any of this testimony. There were some officers who were named. What's going to happen to those officers? It's impossible to tell.
Pentagon officials declined to talk about the Iraq veterans' allegations on camera, but the Marine Corps offered a statement saying in part, the rules of engagement for Marines serving in Iraq have remained very consistent since 2003. If these veterans truly believe they have witnessed violations of the law of armed conflict, it is their duty to provide military investigators with specific details concerning the alleged incidents, to include their own level of involvement, if any.
I had the feeling, reading and watching this, that many of their consciences began to bother them 1 or 2 or 3 years after an event.
Former Marine Corps Captain Bing West worked in the Pentagon during the Reagan administration and has spent a considerable amount of time in Iraq. He's written 2 books about the war. He agrees that the service members should have reported their allegations when they happened.
If they feel that strongly about it for the sake of their consciences, then they should name the names. Otherwise, what they're indicating is that something was widespread, and it wasn't widespread. And so they're defaming over 1 million other soldiers by saying this was commonplace, and that's a canard, that's a lie.
Also testifying at the Democratic Progressive Caucus event was Vincent Emanuele, who served 4 years in the Marine Corps, including time in Anbar province at its most violent.
An act that took place quite often in Iraq was that of taking pop shots at cars that drove by. Our rules of engagement stated that we should first fire warning shots into the ground in front of the car, then the engine block, and then the driver and passengers. Most of the time, however, the shots made their way straight to those very individuals in the car.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Gary Solis.
The problem is that too often we have the civilians who are not collateral damage, they're primary targets. And that's what should not happen. And when you're fighting a counterinsurgency, civilians are the primary goal. You have to secure the allegiance of the civilians, or you'll never secure a victory over the insurgents. And every time we kill a civilian, be it inadvertent or not, we have done something that's contrary to our goal.
Former Marine Sergio Koshergin served in Iraq twice, during the initial invasion in 2003 and then in 2004 to 2005. He said it was commonplace for units to keep confiscated AK-47 rifles on hand that could be dropped after an unarmed civilian was killed.
If you shoot somebody who didn't have anything, or by mistake or anything, some sort of incident happened, place those AK-47 next to him so we have proof that they were enemy combatants and we wouldn't get in trouble for it.
But Bing West said the notion of widespread use of drop weapons is ridiculous, and furthermore,
I would argue that what we're talking about here are anomalies, and it's unfair to the reputation of our entire military to take anomalies and to claim that they were the norm.
But Gary Solis says investigation is warranted.
What were described very definitely could be charged as war crimes. What's going on, or what was going on, or has been going on in Iraq and Afghanistan is so pervasive that we haven't got enough lawyers if we were going to charge everyone that we suspected of having committed such an act. Today it seems as though it takes a pretty blatant act, a pretty serious act to bring about a prosecution.
The group that sponsored the Winter Soldiers event, Iraq Veterans Against the War, now is seeking to have the veterans tell their stories before formal committees of the Congress.